An Empire of Ice and Fire by Longclaw 1-6, Chapter 72, Mark of the Lightbringer.
Your meals, your grace, my lady.
A large man, not the usual servant, bowed, setting a tray before them. Sansa could see something far more scrumptious than the usual barley gruel and unseasoned bacon. Pork, braised with honey and oat mash. A meal fit for a highborn.
I made sure the cooks improved the lot,
as fitting for ladies of your blood and stature. While the scent was pleasant to her, Sansa stared instead at the man. She had seen him before. The likeness was so uncanny. Finally smelling a meal that didn't incite another bout of nausea, Dany smiled at the man. "Thank you." Her voice was filled with gratitude. Nodding, the man lowered his voice.
There are many who support the claim of the Dragon Queen and the White Wolf. Drink secret toasts to their health.
At the words, Dany couldn't help but burst into laughter. "I'm sorry!" The words were exactly what Illyrio had told Viserys all those years ago. Lies then, but the man clearly was completely sincere now. Fitting that she and Jon gained the support of the people, while Viserys languished in pain and muck in the Winterfell dungeon. Sansa didn't pay attention, trying to figure out where she saw the man before. And then it hit her. Sir Dontos?
Aye, my lady.
He beamed, grateful the woman who he had thought of every night for years remembered him.
Dontos Hollard, formerly a knight of the realm.
Joffrey made you his fool? At my suggestion? Sansa felt shame upon her.
I'm sorry. Don't be. I would have died if it had not been for your words. No one cared for the last scion of House Hollard, drunk and oafish. But you did, just as the Starks are the ones that care about the people of the realm.
Shifting on his feet, Dontos moved towards the door.
As evil reaps what it sows, so does good. Remember that, my ladies.
The door closed behind him. Line break. Sweat coated his forehead and his sheen. It soaked the tunic and breeches underneath his armour. The anticipation and nervousness overwhelmed him in a torrent of liquid, but Sir Jaime Lannister was not deterred as he walked quickly down the halls of the, as of now, deserted Red Keep. At this time of night, most had fled to their chambers, or to their mansions within the city behind thick walls of stone and even thicker walls of professional mercenaries. He knew some were still scurrying about, but not in this part. He needed the solitude. He needed the quiet. For the sounds of treason would reverberate through the chambers that night. Pain and disgrace had dogged him his entire life. Kingslayer, Oathbreaker, murderer, traitor. Veneers of arrogance and self-confidence had brushed off the majority of the taunts, but that shield had died with the loss of his hand. Now he didn't bother. The stoic exterior of a hardened warrior of the army of the Divine Chimera accepted every barb, attack and accusation levied against him. Everything Jaime had fought for, strived for in his entire life had led to this. A state of slaves and slave masters. One of black magic and illusions as an undead horde hung over its neck like an executioner's axe. His own daughter killed by his own son, products of an incestuous union between him and his increasingly unstable sister. It was as if the shadows, cast onto the various walls by the various torches and lanterns, were a jury condemning him into the deepest hell, for betraying the memory of the man with whom he had so idolized to this day, the man he had hoped to emulate, as had his mentor, Sir Barristan Selmy. Jaime Lannister had always hated himself for not being able to protect Rhaegar from the drunken oaf he would later call his brother-in-law. But he could protect his sister and son. Reaching the specific room, guards standing in the front, that was what he planned to do.
My lord,
the gold cloaks stated in unison, clicking their heels. You are dismissed, he said flatly. I intend to interrogate the prisoners, and would rather no one hear the screams. The two bowed and hurried away. Jaime had deliberately assigned 2 of the greenest guards to watch over the prisoners. It worked like a charm. As he entered, he found the Dragon Empress and Sansa Stark sitting upright, eyes widening as they recognized who it was.
Your grace, he offered to Daenerys, my lady.
Initial shock wearing off, Dany crossed her arms, anger at such an avowed enemy of her family bubbling forward. Once it was clear Sir Jamie meant them no harm. "What do ye want, Kingslayer?"
"We don't have much time."
He pulled 2 cloaks out of a sack draped over his shoulder, threadbare woolen ones used only by small folk.
"Put these on."
No one could claim that either of the 2 women weren't smart.
"You're helping us."
Sansa's jaw dropped.
"You sent Sir Bronn."
She could have sworn it was Littlefinger. "Why are you doing this?"
"There's a boat at the dockyards, heading to the Citadel."
"You killed my father to save the city from burning." Dany relayed what she had heard from Tyrion. "Even though you served my family, you had to do what was right." Jaime allowed himself a moment to look at his true king's sister.
"Aye."
The facade dropped, the pain and anguish over the decades written across his face. But he had one job to do.
"Let's go."
With a whoosh and a clang, torches flickered wildly from the sudden gust of air. The door was thrown open and slammed across the wall. 3 knights of the Warrior's Sons marched in, fully armoured and swords in their scabbards. Behind them were 5 poor fellows, black leather armour emblazoned with a 7-pointed star and trudgeons in their hands. All in a foul mood, clearly not here to support Jaime's efforts. Dany flinched, angling her stomach away from the door out of instinct, protecting her baby, the unborn prince or princess. Jaime turned towards the door, discreetly putting himself in front of the Empress, something Dany noticed and made note of. Startled by the sudden entrance, Sansa recovered quickly. Acting in stealth, she gingerly lifted a small dagger from Jaime's belt, while no one was noticing. At the lead of the guards, Lancel Lannister by his side, Qyburn stared directly at Jaime.
"I had to see it to believe it."
While the Warrior's Sons kept some semblance of discipline, from the trail of tortured slaves and raped girls, it was only a semblance. The poor fellow thugs openly leered and hefted their trudgeons sadistically. It infuriated Jaime.
"My interrogation of these prisoners is none of your concern,"
he shouted indignantly, slapping Sansa across the cheek, and hoping she understood and forgave.
"I am the acting Lord of Casterly Rock, while my father is a prisoner of the Bastard of Winterfell."
"Which only makes such treachery more horrid." Lancel spoke, the guards advancing for Jaime with their hands on the hilts of their swords. All noticed Widow's Wail attached to the great knight's hip, Valyrian steel forged from the captured sword of House Martell. He reached for his sword, red with fury.
"You have no right, you spineless worm."
Lancel's smirk was quite smug and self-satisfying, unlike the supposedly pious man he made himself out to be. "We have a witness, Sir Jaime, one of complete impeccability." Jaime's face started to fall, not expecting such a statement. "Said witness documented conversations between you and Maester Pycelle. He has already been arrested." Qyburn shook his head as the 2 gold cloaks disarmed Jaime of his sword. "The heir to House Lannister and his highest's own uncle, committing the blackest treason upon the realm. Greatest dishonour to your house." He waved him off dismissively. "Take him to the dungeons." Shaking off the hands of the guards from his shoulders, Jaime held his head high and walked out of the door with the dignity of a Lannister and a Knight of the Realm. As he reached it, a wisp of blonde hair caught his gaze. Jaw dropping, he stared at his sister in complete stupefaction.
"It was you?"
A flicker of shame crossed Cersei's face. Of grief. But as before, when he arrived home from his journey through the Riverlands, her emotions gave way to a hard gaze. "Why?" "You plot against my Joffrey," Cersei replied, voice hard as steel.
"Ah!"
Jaime caught himself.
"Joffrey is a monster."
"How dare you!" Cersei hissed. "You could have killed the Stark bastard. Killed the Targaryen whore. Yet she stands there, alive and with child." Everyone present watched the interaction. Quite the addicting entertainment.
"He is a monster. He murdered Marcella. He will kill Tormund. He has enslaved tens of thousands and will enslave us all if he so wills it."
Fury coursing through her, Cersei wanted to lash out, claw her brother and lover until his eyes were wrenched from their sockets. But somehow she couldn't, merely putting the cold facade back together. One must do what is necessary to save her children, no matter who the threat may be.
"And if Joffrey threatens us all with death?"
Had she gone completely insane?
"You saw that undead monster."
I intend to stay among the living. My son is the chosen of the 7. He will vanquish all our enemies, living and dead. You commit treason against our king, the rightful king." His question was answered. She had lost what was left of her sanity.
"I swore to defend the rightful king, a king worthy of the crown."
He looked down, not willing to see the hate in his sister's eyes.
"Rhaegar was that ruler, and now I fight for his son."
Cersei's eyes widened, as did the 2 Imperial.
"My conscience is clear."
Sparing one last glance at him, feeling the decades of love and affection tearing themselves apart. Without a word, Cersei turned and walked towards her own chambers.
"Take him away,"
Qyburn commanded softly, the warrior's sons complying. With Jaime Lannister disposed of, the Master of Whisperers now focused on the 2 women.
"We have been more than generous,
but I now feel that both of you shall need more secure accommodations. My husband will burn all of you if one hair on our heads is harmed," Daenerys stated, voice of fire.
"And yet he hasn't."
Lancel chuckled, the poor fellows advancing.
"Paper wolf, it would seem."
Suddenly Sansa drew the knife, bringing it down upon her neck to the wide eyes of her sister. "Do not take one step. She would not be Joffrey's plaything again. The old gods as her witness, she wouldn't." While there were horrified or angered looks on the faces of the poor fellows, Qyburn was nonplussed. He extended the palm of his hand.
"The knife, please."
Despite the sting as a small patch of skin was nicked by the blade, Sansa kept it where it was. "One more step, and I deny Joffrey his trophy."
"Don't do it, sister!"
Dany yelled, the title muffled as the poor fellow wrapped a gag around her head, shutting her up. Wagging his finger, Qyburn stepped forward. "Do not be foolish, young lady." Expression that of a confident old grandfather, he still kept his movements hesitant. "Hand me the dagger." "Hand it over, young Stark," chimed in Brother Lancel, several steps behind Qyburn. "I would rather die." But Sansa's voice quivered for an instant, her resolve weakening. The pain didn't bother her, or the uncertainty of death, but the memory of her family. Those she loved. The one she loved. The moment's hesitation brought 2 simultaneous movements. Just as Qyburn dashed towards Sansa, so too did Daenerys, elbow the poor fellow behind her and use his shock to break his hold. Closer to her sister by marriage, she managed to wrest the blade away as Qyburn reached for them.
"Give it here,"
the Master of Whisperers hissed, scrambling with the Dragon Empress. He was taller, but she had the fire and grit of a Targaryen warrior. It was Lancel Lannister's arrival several seconds later. Ever the coward, the zealous faith notwithstanding, finally ended the scuffle. "I'll have that, you insolent!" Grabbing her hand, he yanked at the knife while exposing the back of her hand for both to see. Presenting the pock-mark of scars upon the pale skin, Qyburn placed it together. A wrenching gasp flew from his lips, wrinkled face growing white with terror.
"No! It can't be!"
The prophecy. His highest visions. What? His own poor fellows subdued Sansa Stark. Lancel shoved them aside to grab Daenerys' palm from beside Qyburn.
"By the maiden!"
His eyes widened as saucers, recognizing the pattern of stars as a true believer. Dany watched him with complete confusion, their behaviour not comprehending in her mind.
"It is the sigil. The mark."
Such was even more confusing, before she was thrown into a whirlwind of activity and interest dwarfing that of her initial arrival to the city. Line break. The majority of the small council was hunched over the table, studying the map of the city with hushed voices and pained tones. Defensive positions, left mostly to rot since the vanquishing of Renly Baratheon's army at the Battle of the Blackwater Bay years before, were woefully undermanned. All plans depending on Tywin's army of the Divine Chimera proactively defending the city in the outer fields and forests of the Crownlands. But said army had been vanquished and captured at Highgarden. 10,000 gold cloaks and mercenaries could barely fight against Renly's army, hobbled with wildfire. Even adding the additional 10,000 among the faith militant and various slave overseers against 120,000 soldiers and 6 dragons of the Imperial army, if all captured bent the knee, the city would fall. Only the vaunted scorpions and rockets of the air defences were viable, plus wildfire stocks, but none were willing to use the latter, and the former would collapse upon a full assault. Things would be far more grim, however.
Your Holiness!
Looking up from the maps, the High Sparrow was greeted by Qyburn.
The mark has been found!
He did a double take, as did the others gathered around him.
What mark?
Truly? The High Sparrow asked.
Not good at all. The symbol of Azor Ahai, etched into the surface?
All knew the constellation of the Lightbringer, from the free folk to the far north, to the merchants of Koth to the east.
Where is it?
Qyburn nodded, hand shaking as he outlined it on the back of his palm.
On the Dragon Queen's hand. Fuck me blind.
As the group shuffled about, Littlefinger quietly whispered in a command to one of his personal servants. It was time to set into motion an old arrangement. While the city slept, some soundly, others restlessly, the Red Keep saw a flurry of activity. Officials, guards and servants stashed about the grounds like ants with a disturbed anthill. Gold cloaks and those of the stars and swords formed a protective screen around Daenerys as she was led up the staircase towards the Great Hall and Maegor's holdfast by sovereign guards. Arms pinned that could encircle her tiny wrists twice over, she was literally frog-marched, feet not even brushing the stone. All was dealt in stoic silence. A dragon sheds no tears. And thus she was thrust into the throne room itself. The Iron Throne. The twisting hulk of steel and iron that she had so longed for, so long fought for, loomed over her large, towering like a leviathan over her. In person, it seemed so minuscule. Something one would take to be metal scraps, not the great throne that her ancestor forged with the fire of Balerion the Dread. Curious, Dany began to approach it, only for a harsh hiss from Lancel Lannister to stop her. The scrawny monk didn't scare her, but Boros Blount gripping his blade was rather disconcerting. Servants heaved open the brass-plated doors as the retinue entered the throne room. At the lead was the High Sparrow, Dario, and various members of the small council trailing behind him. Whispering something to Brother Lancel, he then approached the glaring Daenerys. "Where is Sansa?" Daenerys commanded. There was no doubt as to who this was. The same man that introduced Joffrey and led the procession at the Dragon Pit. "Where is the Kingslayer? I demand to know where they have been taken." A gloved hand clasped over her mouth.
"Shut it."
While she struggled, Dario held her tightly in place as the High Sparrow approached. Time slowed, her skin crawling.
"Gods protect me,"
she thought, begging whatever deities existed to spare her unborn child from malicious intentions. But the High Sparrow merely took her hand.
"By the stranger,"
he murmured, finding the pattern of scars easily. They were long since healed, a combination of powder burns and pinprick gashes. Faded red-pink contrasted greatly with the pale skin of the Targaryen queen. What resulted was a mark so uncannily in the resemblance to the pattern of stars, most infamous in the winter skies. Line break. A full moon bore down on King's Landing that night, shining a brightness only the mid-morning sun could top upon the city. Not a cloud marred the starry canvas draped above the earth. While this was ominous in and of itself, those from the most insightful augurs to the lowliest peasant trembled at an event so rare it could only be a sign from the gods. A comet streaked across the sky, while the one that signalled the return of the dragons from extinction was blood red. This one glowed a blinding white, matching that of the moon. Some stated it heralded the coming of the victory of the great Chimera. Others quietly admitted something far different.
"The Lord of Light prepares himself to reclaim this land from the demon."
From atop an impromptu dais, Kinvara proclaimed the gospel to the gathered slaves.
"The long night approaches,
and only he will unify those under his banners and those under the grip of the Golden One."
"Fuck that!"
Jeers rang out from the crowd, mostly from Dornish captives and bondservants sold into slavery for their debts. The large collection of Essosi stayed silent, both sympathetic to the priestess of R'hllor and cowed from lives of solitude. "Where was the prince that was promised when Tywin burned his way through Dorne?" "He has vanquished the scourge of the West," Kinvara answered simply. "He will free us from bondage, as his wife the Dragon Queen did in Meereen." The crowd broke into whispers, mulling it over. One rabble-rouser was not buying it, swaying the majority of the crowd. The wheel crushes us all. What did the Mad King do for us? What did Ned Stark do for us? They are no different from the Lannisters. The jeers turned profane. Only the line of thugs surrounding Kinvara keeping them back. Jon Snow the bastard will never show up. He will burn us to death with his dragons, the rabble-rouser proclaimed. He does not care about us. Only that damned throne. We must stand with him. He has risen from the death, and soon the prince that was promised will wield the sword of flame and bring the new dawn for us all.
The sword of flame? Thoros of Myr mused, visibly drunk. Shouldn't that make you the light-bringer, Beric?
Beric Dondarrion and rolled his eyes.
The downsides of a happy drunk. He can't shut up before he deploys bad jokes.
He looked over at the hooded figure on his other side.
Still, do you believe in the prophecy?
The hooded figure spared a quick glance at the still preaching priestess. Her eyes were alight with the fire of her cause, one he had seen so often in Daenerys. In the mirror, not as much.
Not for a cause. They are just myths. He dropped his gaze. Hope to those who crave such, but nothing more. I'm sure you don't believe that. Beric chuckled. Our friend the burnt dog sulking in the back certainly does. But not you.
He crossed his arms.
You certainly won't be here, in the land of the living, if not for it.
Looking back at him, Beric smiled.
I am sure
that you saw something in the void of death, Jon Snow. The last was a whisper, one only Jon heard. Dispersed among the pen were his men, the great nobles and commanders of the Imperial army, men that Jon trusted above all others to accomplish the greatest feat since Daenerys Stormborn walked out of the fire with 3 dragons. One that would most likely fail, and leave him a widower and his children motherless. Perhaps continuing with the plan in the face of such odds required faith, not just in the gods, but in himself.
The night is dark and full of terrors. The night is dark and full of terrors.
Without knowing, Jon found himself mouthing the words as Kinvara said them. Line break. Sandals slapped on the narrow steps leading downstairs to the king's private chambers. The High Sparrow did not question why his highest ordered a renovation of the Red Keep to build a set of rooms underground. There were reasons cited, but he did not care. Joffrey Baratheon was the 7th chosen champion in the mortal world, and he would never question his commands. As he struggled to both maintain his balance and scramble down the steps, he said a silent prayer that his sovereign wouldn't take this too drastically. But it complements his nightmare. As Joffrey's spiritual advisor, the High Sparrow was one of the few who knew. Washing the worry from his body and adopting total penitence before his king, the High Sparrow reached the bottom step. With practiced movements, a blinded servant artfully arranged the various fruits, pastries, and roasted meats on the plate. The Chimera ate little, choosing more to brood and rage than sate his gluttony, as his father did. But when he did, he was very picky. She rested at the top of the small table resting next to where Joffrey stood, other servants undressing him for bed. Looking at the offering, Joffrey lashed out at the servant's cheek. "Water!" Rubbing her cheek, Arya bowed. Joffrey was more a monster than she had known him before, and that was saying something. She rushed to get the bowl of water, knowing where it rested in the dark room. All the blinded servants' girls had seen others that had been displeased Joffrey too many times. Or what was left of them. She had just snatched it up when the High Sparrow burst in. In his rush, the High Sparrow collapsed upon the bare stone. He winced at the rough floor bit into his skin, but forced himself to ignore it. "Oh, Highest, I must speak with thee!" Joffrey hadn't noticed him come in, but his normal rage was mollified by the soft hands of his servants caressing his pale skin. They were so meek. Any defiance broken out of them. Perhaps he'd take one of them before bed. It had been a while. "Say your piece." "We—" The High Sparrow gulped, feeling every one of his 70 years upon the earth in his creaking bones and dry tongue. "We found a symbol burned into the skin of the Dragon Queen, All Highest, Out with it! Gulping, the old man looked upon the vaulted ceiling.
The mark of the Lightbringer!
The basin of water was knocked out of Arya's hands as Joffrey snarled, lashing out with fury. Impossible! Line break. Looking up, pausing his molars from gnawing at the wad of knot in his maw, one of the new things in abundance in King's Landing, the gold cloak peered into the darkness surrounding the farmhouse.
Did you hear something?
His halting tone indicated him a functioning illiterate. Eyes peering through the window of the farmhouse, another scoffed.
Stop being paranoid,
he shot back, placing his attention back to the goings-on inside. Feminine screams, the men salivating, as soon as his officer and senior comrade were done. Arrogance and sadistic lust preventing him from noticing the crouching form behind him.
There are no wolf fuckers here.
Wrapping a mailed hand hurriedly over his mouth, Podrick Payne slammed a knife between his ribs, sharp tip piercing the chainmail. The gold cloak's eyes went wide as the metal tore through his heart. Muttered grunts ended, slumping dead in his arms. Beside him, Podrick could see Brienne slice the other's head clean off, quickly catching it before it fell loudly upon the ground. A moment's stillness, followed by instant relief at the cries of laughs and further feminine cries. They lined up at the door.
Ready?
Brienne breathed, readying her foot. Podrick nodded.
Now!
With a yell, Brienne kicked the door in, cheap wood tearing off its hinges and crashing to the floor. Rapidly they stormed into the cottage, swords at the ready. Not that it mattered. The two gold cloaks inside were far too concerned on their raping a pair of farm women, mother and daughter, that they tripped on their own yanked-down pants before even reaching their weapons. Quick flashes of steel and 2 more piles of flesh and blood for clean-up. Half an hour later, Tyrion hid his distaste by sipping at a skin of sour wine, creating new distaste. I remember the days when the city watch at least had some honour. Raping a woman. He shook his head. It isn't good unless she enjoys it too. The Stark bannermen parked Bran by the fireplace. As he had insisted on coming along in the fast march, he insisted on always being near the flames upon making camp. The young Stark child had a running contest with the Red Witch on who could disconcert Tyrion the most. Quite, was the only response from the three-eyed raven. Plopping down onto a chair, well as easily as a dwarf could. Tyrion regarded the boy. And how would you know that? He chided teasingly. Bran looked over, a glint in his eyes. Only my legs are crippled, Lord Tyrion.
A true Stark. Never kissing and telling.
Tyrion smacked his hand on his thigh, chuckling. He caught Podrick out of the corner of his eye.
Ah, Podrick, my friend. You should appreciate this conversation, considering how skilled you are at pleasing women.
Trying not to send a death glare at Tyrion, his former mentor not having any blame at the kidnapping of his now lover, Podrick merely unfolded the map of King's Landing as Brienne, Tyene Martell, and Harry Strickland entered behind him. So this was the one of 7 sentry posts lining the southwestern approaching to the city. Tyrion sighed. His attempt at humour hadn't cheered up the young lad. He really must be in love with Sansa Stark. Sweet and noble, but it could almost drive a man to foolish brashness. Tyrion would know.
Without my father in charge, they've grown lax. It doesn't surprise me that Joffrey is turning inward rather than outward.
We've taken all of the sentry posts, Tyene revealed flatly. Not even a loss among our forces.
They won't send replacements until tomorrow afternoon. Too lazy about it, Strickland stated.
He was still viewed with suspicion, and fought to prove his loyalty and the loyalty of his men.
According to the plan, things in the city will already be complete chaos by that time. According to the plan is the key phrase in that.
Tyrion downed his wine, as sour as it was. Battle plan survived contact with the enemy as a... Well, I'm not saying that aloud.
Can't count on it, Strickland.
Oh, I know that. The lives of his men on the battlefield proved it to him. Suddenly the ground shook as a low growl filled the room. The dragons had landed, shaken out of their torpor at the loss of their mother to journey with the vanguard of the Imperial army. Tyrion was sure that the direwolves would be here, but news from Riverrun stated that one was expecting a litter, so they were out of commission.
Life goes on, I suppose, he thought.
Do not worry. All looked at Bran. They are in position. I can see it. Joffrey's prophecy. The prophecy of the Golden One. Will come to fruition tomorrow. Podrick hoped his, hopefully, future brother-in-law was right. Only the unsullied Golden Company and Northern Hoplites had advanced. 6,000 in total. Not enough to storm a defended city, but plenty to lend help to a revolting one. Gods be with us all. End of story. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. Good one, that one. Wow. Okay, Jon again in the slave pits. I mean, it's a good thing he can't get burned because he is playing with fire. And Daenerys' scars being the mark of what Joffrey is scared of? Okay, that's really smart. So, all getting ready. But one thing I like is that Tyrion is trying to cheer up Pod. That's just sweet. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe. Hit the bell. Check out my other videos. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Take care, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!